Welcome to Betrayal Recovery Radio, the official podcast of APSATS, the Association of Partners of Sex Addict Trauma Specialists, hosted by Dr. Jake Porter. APSATS is a nonprofit organization providing professional training and compassionate support to partners affected by problematic sexual behavior and betrayal trauma. In each episode, Dr. Jake guides a conversation of enlightening insights and practical tools to empower those affected by sex addiction and betrayal trauma to use their voices and live their values. The mission of Betrayal Recovery Radio is to offer hope to those in need of healing and growth to those moving through grief. And now, here's your host, Dr. Jake Porter.
Well, hello there. I am Dr. Jake Porter, your host at Betrayal Recovery Radio, and this week we're going to be talking about one of my favorite subjects. I'm actually going to share with you something that I did a while back, and it's going to come in two parts. So you're going to get half of it in this episode, and a week from now the other half will drop. And that is on the subject of core values, specifically how core values can come to play in your relationship, core values for couples. So I'm going to talk more about this in the actual show, so I don't want to repeat myself and make you hear it all twice. But the reason I'm so excited to share this with you is because of all the many different sort of interventions and concepts and ideas that I use with couples. I would have to say that calling upon our core values has got to be within the top 5 things that I found to be most powerful, most transformative for people, both individually and together as a couple. Your values make a difference, whether you know it or not. And so I hope that if you've never given a lot of thought to this, that you will take some time to really process what I'm going to share with you today in this episode and in the next. And so sit back, grab maybe a notepad, something to write with, because I hope that you'll jot some of this stuff down so that you can later go on and do some of the reflection work to really implement these principles in your life. All right, here we go. Core values for couples.
Tonight we're talking about core values for couples. Let me just go ahead and throw up our presentation here. And let's see. There we go. I want to share with y'all some ideas about core values. Their place for us individually, but also their place for us in relationships, and it really is a both and there. And so that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. Hope that's what you signed up for and what you knew you were getting into. These slides I'm going to make available as a PDF for all of you. In fact, I think I might be able to do that right now just so that is done. In fact, I'm going to do that. Slides for core values. And that way you don't feel like you have to, grab every single, take down notes of every single thing here. So let me share that with you. That's being shared. I'm going to share that for a little while later. That's going to come down because there's a different file that will be shared with you then. But that's available both now, and also if you don't grab it now, you can get it during the replay. Don't forget that every single one of my webinars, if you sign up for it, you don't just have access to it live, but you've got on-demand lifetime access to it moving forward as soon as the replay's ready. All right, so here we go. Core values for couples. Let's jump in. One of the biggest challenges that I see couples face is the way I put it here on this slide is the ease of not engaging their relationship on purpose. The ease of not engaging their relationship on purpose. It is so easy to just go into automatic mode, right? To just slide into that, non-conscious, automatic way of relating to our partners. And there's good reason for this, really. There is. This happens primarily because our brains are always looking for ways to conserve energy, because the brain's number one job is to keep us alive, and energy is important to keep us alive. And so if there's a way to conserve energy, our brains do it. One of the ways our brains do that is through automation. And we need this. This is a good thing by and large. I automate how to tie my shoe. No longer do I think, okay, first I make this look like this, and then I wrap it around this way, and now I've got to stick this through a hole. Which hole is it? Through muscle memory, through having done that now 10,000 times, you just tie your shoes, or you just drive to work, or you just play a scale on the pianos. It's that implicit memory. Muscle memory would be one form of implicit memory. Well, you know what else gets encoded in our implicit memory? How we do relationships, how our partner reacts to us, responds to us, how we respond to them. And so it's so, and this doesn't have to be a bad thing, right? That when you and your spouse, your partner, you're just kind of in your groove, doing your thing, maybe it's a making breakfast on the weekend routine, right? And like you go to start making the eggs, and your wife gets the milk out, and she hands you this knife, and you start whipping, and you hand this to her because you've done it so many, and that's a wonderful, beautiful thing. Well, sometimes it's not always wonderful and beautiful, right? Sometimes actually we have gone automatic in ways that are less helpful. We're not engaging in our relationship on purpose anymore. Maybe we're automating with a bias towards self-protection or against our partner, or with that negativity bias that every single brain has within it, because it's part of the human condition in this world where we feel like we have to protect ourselves all the time. So this is huge, right? I'm not actually listening anymore because I already know what you're going to say, would be an example. So another sort of foundational thought here. When I'm working with couples, this is a question that I often ask to betrayed partners in a couple where there's been, say, chronic infidelity or betrayal, okay? I say, would you want to go back to the exact relationship that you had, just without and then fill in the blank for the specific unwanted behavior? So let's say a husband was acting out sexually, being unfaithful. So I ask his wife, would you want everything exactly the same, minus his acting out behavior? All the other dynamics exactly the same, just he's not doing that anymore. I have never, not one time, I've now in one form or another worked with hundreds of couples. Not one time have I had a betrayed partner say to me, oh yeah, I'd want that. Because when they discover that there's been this betrayal, and when they start actually like being snapped out of the automation, and they start looking at the reality of the relationship, what they come to is they say, there was a lot going on. Not just that, there was a whole dysfunctional context in which those behaviors were taking place. And they say, no, I wouldn't want that. I want my relationship to be different. Well, this is why we're talking about core values tonight, because whether you know that the dynamic in your relationship needs to change, or whether you might just think, we've been lulled into this automatic process where we're not really living in this relationship on purpose. Core values, a commitment, an understanding, a devotion to core values, both individually and together, is a way forward, a way of busting out of that and doing something differently on purpose. All right, so that's what we're doing. Now, in terms of my model of couple-centered recovery, this may not apply to all of you. I know that I've got couples on here where they're not dealing with chronic betrayal or infidelity, whatever, and you just hang tight. I also want to speak, though, to those couples who are, because I know that that's a large portion of those on with me. And I have this available for you as well to download. I'll throw that file up here in just a second. Actually, I'll go ahead and do that for you. So if you want to download this, because I know that slide's probably not super easy to read, you can download a PDF of these phases of recovery. Now, what I want to point out to you is where core values come into play. Now, where you actually read the words core values are right down here. Okay, notice this green strip that runs along the bottom of the couples row here that says transforming relational dynamics. You see, the reality is that from the very beginning of this process, when I'm working with a couple within my model, we are dealing with the relationship dynamics. Because when there's been hiddenness, when there's been gaslighting, when there's been betrayal, and those things have been on board, well, when those things have been on board, there's been a disequilibrium and a disempowerment of the one who has part of reality being withheld. That's disempowering. And so those dynamics have to be changed. One way we do that is I call people to core values-based action. You're going to understand what that means later. But basically, that's a way of right away both people being able to take steps to create a sense of justice and get back to a place of equilibrium. It's not going to go back straight here. If you don't understand that, you need to see my coaster video. Just go to YouTube, Jake Porter, search for Jake Porter, Are You on the Coaster? You can see why it's not going to go straight from here to here. There's going to be a time of rebalance before it can get back to that place once safety's been established. So core values come into place right at the beginning. And this is, we use values to help partners begin to discern their own boundaries that they need. We use values to call those who have done the betraying to take steps and commit toward their recovery. We use values for all of those things. But in terms of the coupleship, where they are together going to really start working on values is after disclosure. In these phases here, when they're grieving together, values come into play in really powerful ways during the grief process. I'll talk about that later. But then also when they begin to revision the relationship and redesigning what they want their relationship to look like, how they want the dynamics to work in their relationship, core values play an important role there. Now, I've got this little note right down here I want to point out. In couple-centered recovery, in my model, the initial individual calls to values-based actions. So those where I'm calling this individual to it, maybe just the betrayed partner or just the addicted partner. Those initial individual calls to values-based actions serve to prepare the couple for eventually establishing joint values for the relationship. As I'm going to talk about later, if you haven't done core values work for yourself first, it's not going to work as well to just start with doing it in your relationship. Your core values individually are to be brought to bear on the process of finding your core values for your relationship. And we will walk through all of that. All right. Hey, if at any time anyone has a question, please feel free to just pop that in the chat box. There's also a little hand, I think, speak hand, and I can give you permission to speak if you would like to voice your question aloud. So at any point, please feel free to do that. Okay. All right. Let me get back to my slides. Okay. So first of all, though, before we get too far into this, what are values? I mean, that's something we all know basically what the word means, but have you ever really paused to think about what core values are and how they are meant to serve you individually and your relationships? So I always like to do definitions of what things are by also talking about what they're not. That helps bring clarity and focus for me. So what are values? Well, number one, they're not goals. They're not goals. When I teach people how to write a goal, in fact, I just did this last semester in the grad school where I teach, Houston Graduate School of Theology, in the master's course on addiction treatment that I was teaching. I was teaching how to create treatment plans. An important part of a good treatment plan is to have clear goals. And one of the things that I said to my students is, you haven't actually articulated a goal very well if it's not attainable. You need to be able to say, yes, done, check that box. Well, core values aren't goals in that they're never fully attained. So, for example, throughout tonight, I'm going to reference my own core values several times. one of my core values is kindness. So the moment I act kindly, I perform kindness, I don't get to check the box and say, accomplished. I'm done. Right? Been there, done that. So values are different than goals in that a goal is something that I actually achieve. I arrive at the fulfillment of a goal. Not so with core values. So core values provide me a direction, and it's a direction that I keep on moving. It doesn't matter how kind I am, I can always be more kind, whether by degree or through opportunity. Just have another opportunity to be kind, find new ways and realms to display kindness. So it's not a goal, it's a direction. And it's a direction, think about this, that we can keep moving. We can just keep going in that direction. There's no end there. There's no end to how kind can I be. All right. Secondly, and this is a big deal. Oh my goodness. Y'all are going to think, my gosh, he repeats himself a lot, because I'm going to talk about this so much tonight. But core values are not imposed. You can't tell someone else what their core values are. They just don't work that way. All right. I can't ask someone else what my core values are. Now, yeah, get a consult from the people who know you best, from your partner, from your best friends, from people in support groups with you, from, those folks who really know you well. Sure, get a consult, get some input from them. But at the end of the day, you have to choose your own core values. You have to own your own core values. They have to be adopted. You have to exercise agency. You have to choose them. They cannot be imposed. All right. Number 3, they are not emotional. All right. So this is tricky, because certainly it feels good. There's usually a positive emotional experience that comes with acting on our core values. This is not the same, however, as saying that they are an emotion. Now, one of my core values is joy. But does that mean that I always only do that which makes me happy in the moment? Well, absolutely not. Our emotions change. Our emotions are driven by our circumstances. And so if I let my emotions drive the bus, what I'm going to find is that I often end up regretting choices that I make or behaviors that I act out. Instead, my core values are to be consistent. So how does that work with a core value like joy? So for me, and we're going to talk later about defining our core values with clarity. So for me, I had to get really clear. What I mean by joy, okay, is that I'm going to act with an attitude toward ultimate joy. Meaning, I know what's going to make me happiest in the end. I know I'm seeking long-term. I'm seeking long-term joy. And I'm going to choose to go ahead and draw from my long-term joy in moments where I'm not feeling necessarily happy in the moment. Okay, so something hard's going on. Maybe I want to react with impatience. Maybe I want to get snippy. But I know that I'm not going to feel good about that later. I know that what will feel best is to act in integrity with my values, to be humble and to be kind. And so I'm going to borrow the joy of the future of acting on that in the present moment. I get to do that. It's really empowering, y'all. So a core value allows me to be consistent. It allows me to be consistent and to not be driven by my emotions. Not that we need to ignore our emotions, as I always say to my clients. to my clients, emotions are important. They're important data, but they're only one point of data. They're not the whole picture. And I can make choices that take into account more data than merely what I'm feeling in the moment. It's an amazing thing. Okay. My values are not outcome driven. All right. So in other words, my values aren't based on what the other person will or won't do. All right. That is what, clinically speaking, we would call that an external locus of control. Something outside of myself. No, my values are integrity driven. And I actually see there, Catherine put a comment. I found values that were grouped into general categories. Interesting. Mine all fell into integrity category. I have a little different take on that. I do believe in grouping values according to categories. I think that that's really helpful. I'm going to talk about that later. I have a little different take on integrity. We'll get to that. There's a whole slide on that in a minute. So I talk about all values as being integrity driven and not outcome driven. So integrity is about wholeness. Think about the word integer. If you remember from math, an integer is a whole number, no decimal, no fraction. So it's a whole. Integrity, integrated, it's all the same Latin root there. So it's about being whole, which is about me. All right, not you. So in other words, my values are not about getting a certain reaction or response from my wife. Doesn't work that way. Instead, my values are about staying true to who I want to be and how I want to show up, regardless of how another person responds. So in other words, values, just to get practical here for a minute, values are what end up often giving people the courage to go ahead and set a boundary that the other person may not like, right? So I have fear about this boundary. I have fear that you may react poorly to it, but I can set this boundary because it's rooted in my own values, and it's something necessary for me to act in alignment with who I want to be and how I want to show up in a relationship. And then lastly here, values are not for highlighting weakness, but for promoting congruence. In other words, whether it's for myself or in a coupleship, like when I'm doing this for myself, it's not, well, you know what? I'm really impatient. So patience needs to be one of my values. I mean, values are certainly a way to grow in areas where there's room for growth, not denying that at all. But it's really not about highlighting weakness. It's not about that. It's about promoting congruence. In other words, another way to frame that would be, when I'm impatient, I don't feel good afterwards. I feel shame. I feel not myself. I don't like the way I reflect on how I showed up in those moments. I would much rather show up congruent with how I want to show up. You know, like I've got an ideal image for myself. I'd rather show up more aligned with that. So it's about promoting that congruence. That's another word you're going to hear me say a whole lot tonight. It's not about highlighting weakness. It's not to beat myself up or my partner up. So if my partner, say my wife comes to me and she says, oh, well, yeah, one of my core values is I don't know, let me think what one of hers would be. Patience. Let's just go with that. Patience. You know, okay, wonderful. Now, that doesn't mean that the next time she shows up impatient, I say, hey, don't forget your core value. Don't forget your value of being patient. You know, I'm not going to use it as a club. That's actually going to have the opposite effect. I've got a cool quote right here. I love this quote. This is from a book right here. Now, this is actually for clinicians, so it's not really for couples. Acceptance and commitment therapy is a model of therapy that that utilizes core values work a lot. This is by, well, the authors are there, Levin McKay. It's 2017 notebook on leading couples through acceptance and commitment therapy. This is a quote from that book. It's a great book if you work with couples. good stuff in here. Values are not a means to an end. They are the end. Our values are always under our control, regardless of circumstances. They are choices, not conditions, and can be actualized at any moment. Isn't that cool? So they're not a means to an end. They are an end. So when I live out my values, that in and of itself is enough. Not enough forever, not enough for always, but in that moment, right? So let's say I have a meeting with a colleague, and I know it's going to be a hard meeting. Maybe we're disagreeing over something. We're trying to work out some conflict. And it doesn't go well in terms of us coming to any terms of agreement or peace. Maybe we're still at odds with each other. If I can walk away thinking, well, it's not where I want it to be eventually, there's still work to do here, but at least I showed up congruent with my values, in my integrity, that's enough. In that moment, that's an end. That's an advantage in itself. And I can do that no matter how the other person is showing up. It's a choice that I have before me at any time. I can act on my core values and actualize them in any moment. It's a powerful, powerful truth if you can grab hold of that. Okay, now I mentioned how I look at integrity a little bit differently. So when I'm working with couples, I actually tell them you can't make integrity one of your core values, because that's sort of like putting the definition, putting a word in its own definition, right? Because the way I define integrity is to say that I am aligned with or congruent with my core values. So to me, integrity isn't a value in and of itself. Integrity is a state of being in alignment with or congruent with my values. So the gap between my behavior and my values, that gap there is my lack of integrity. All right. I mean, it's possible that people can be totally at odds, but usually there's at least some portion of overlap between what I value and how I behave. Okay. But where there's distance, that's where there's lack of integrity. So I find integrity when my behavior and my values align, when they match up, when they're congruent with each other. That's integrity in my book. Okay. So, and I talk pretty openly about how I'm in recovery myself. And one of the things that I often share is that when I actually got into real recovery, it took me, I had some false starts over 6 or 8 months. Once I really got into some sobriety and recovery, the sense of integrity that I felt was so amazing and so powerful that I remember having the thought, wow, this is what integrity is. I never want to lose this. Now, have I done that perfectly? Absolutely not. I'm not. I don't think anyone does. But I had never really experienced integrity, behavior and values aligning like I did and when I got into recovery. And so it was one of the greatest gifts of my recovery. And it was because finally my feet and my mouth were going in the same direction. It's integrity. One of the ways that, we talk about boundaries, or I'm sorry, not boundaries, values, is as a compass. Sometimes I use guardrails. I'll think about guardrails on a maybe a bridge that keep you from getting off course. But what I really love is the compass metaphor. And Coach Kathy Reynolds, who works with me, she's the first person I heard this from. I've read it in several places now. But the idea of values is a compass, a sort of compass. They orient us. So in other words, if I'm in the woods and I'm trying to figure out which direction do I go, or let's be real. Today, it's more like I'm in the middle of a city and I'm like, okay, I know I need to go west. Which way is that? I can pull out my map. app, and I can tell from the streets, figure out which way west is, then start moving in that direction. So it orients me. Okay, here's where this is. So that would be over there. The sun's setting in the west. So, that kind of thing. In the same way, my values orient me. Okay, what do I do in this situation? Well, here's the deal. I know I want to show up according to my values. I know I want to be kind and courageous and humble and joyful and moving toward joy. So I know that's what I want. So now I can start to get my bearings. Along with orienting us, they can direct us. Okay, now I can take a step in accordance with these directions. And it's going to guide my choices and the behaviors. And what's cool about this is that as I orient according to my values, so I start to think, so I'm taking my thoughts and I'm running them through this compass of values, and I start directing my thoughts now. So first orienting them and then directing them according to this compass of values. And then I start making choices according to this. That has a developmental impact on me. I start to really geek out here. I want to admit, it starts to really get exciting here. These choices change the trajectory of my own development. Isn't that cool? I think that's really cool. Now, pardon me while I really, really geek out for just a couple of minutes, okay? There's this is way oversimplified, this graphic, but it works. It's doing its job. You've got your emotions, you've got your thoughts, and you've got your actions or your behaviors, right? So your emotions, here's what we know from neuroscience. It used to be thought that my thinking, okay, the thoughts I had created my emotions. So if I changed my thinking, I would change my emotions. There's some truth to that, but what we actually know now is that primarily, like our very, very, very first thoughts are driven more by our emotions. We do our emotional thinking first, and then our cognitive, more logical thinking second. So your body's affective state, that is the actual state of your body. Do you feel a lot of intensity? Is it really unpleasant? Is it really pleasant? So in other words, am I feeling joyful, serene, exuberant, or am I feeling depressed, anxious, threatened? Whatever I'm feeling in my body affects how my brain processes incoming data. Everything I see, hear, smell, taste, touch, all the incoming data is being affected by my affective state, which is closely connected to my emotional state. So this emotional state begins to play into the formation of my thoughts. My thoughts, and what I'm talking about there, is the interpretation of the situational data. What's going on here? So I'm doing this in line with my history and what's going on in the state of my body. And so these two things together, my emotions and my thoughts now, are going to non-consciously direct my behavior. So do I snarl? Do I cross my arms? Do I shrug my shoulders? Do I scoff? Do I start laughing? Do I get giddy? Do I leave? All of those actions are being driven by this joint, this paired reality of my emotions and my thoughts that are going on. But also, the behaviors that I'm acting on reinforce my affective state and my emotions and my thoughts. So there's really, it's cyclical. It's also reciprocal, going both ways. It's very complicated, but all of that to say that what I do, my behavior, has a very, very powerful formative effect neurobiologically, like at the level of the neural structures of my brain, how things are woven together, how I feel in my body, what thoughts that's connected to, how I relate that to certain environmental stimuli. My acting on those things cements those in the most powerful of ways. Values interrupt this, okay? As it says right here, values interrupt this cycle at the most powerful place to make a change, the stage of embodiment. So in other words, a different set of thoughts, my values, that's going to be paired with a whole different set of emotions and desires and drives, comes to bear, is brought to bear, and I act on those instead of these over here. And when I do that and I act on that, I'm actually now really beginning to shift the literal neural connections throughout my brain and nervous system running through my whole body. And when I do that over and over and over again, it literally has this formative effect that changes the trajectory of my development. So forgive me, I'm going to geek out for just a little bit longer here. Now, this I know is this is my first time. I just created this graphic for this webinar, so it may not work, but here's what I want you to think about. So here's time, moving through time. And this orange cone represents freedom to choose my own development within my nature. In other words, there are certain things I cannot do or be because it's not in my nature. It's genetically impossible for me to, for example, I can't levitate. I can't fly like a bird. Okay. And so I can't make choices to develop into a flying creature, not unless I have a helicopter or an airplane. That would be outside of this orange cone. Okay. So it doesn't matter, how many choices I tried to make, that choice is outside the cone. But within the cone of freedom to choose within my nature, I've got a lot of choices I can make, right? So for example, do I choose piano lessons when I'm 6 years old, or do I choose Boy Scouts, Cub Scouts? Well, guess which one I chose? I chose piano lessons. Now, there were other factors that went into that. I want to, admit that it's never, there's always influences and that sort of thing, but it was a real choice that I made. And that choice sent me, let's say, more this direction, downward in the cone, than say upward in the cone to where I ended up. You see what I mean? These choices lead us to another choice, to another choice, to another choice. Now, this blue cone here is saying that over time, that potential that I had genetically gets more confined over time. So, for example, there was a time when, I showed some real athletic potential. I actually had a pretty good arm. My dad wanted me to be a pitcher. He thought I might be a pretty good pitcher. But I never nurtured that earlier in life. And at this stage, at 39 years old, I'm probably not going to become a professional pitcher. I'm probably not even going to become a, great pitcher, for a recreational league because I've waited so long. But you know what? I don't believe I could ever wait too long to improve? Compassion or patience or courage or those core value kind of things. So in other words, yeah, over time, I say this because clients come to me and they're like, I'm too old to change. Well, there might be some things it's too old to change, but there's plenty of things that it's not. There are plenty of things you can still change. So let me just show you a little bit more about what I mean. Whoops. Here. So let's say this is a developmental trajectory, that's pretty, this person's not trying real hard. They've got a particular course and certain things in life bump them up and down, but this is where they end up. And let's say that this spot, this green line down here, where it ends up is someone who's, crabby and selfish and, not one that really wants to participate in relationships. But let's say that along the way, this person actually says, no, that's not, I see where I'm headed. I see where I am and where I'm headed. I see how I'm showing up. And this isn't how I want to show up now. It's not how I want to show up in the future. This isn't who I want to be in the moment and who I want to become. And they start saying, I'm going to make different choices day by day. I'm going to make different choices about who I am and how I show up. And so they create a different path. And it's not a perfect path, but they actually are able to make choices. And through these intentional choices, they're set on a whole different developmental trajectory so that they end up someone who's maybe very giving and loving, compassionate and patient and whatever else. Okay. People can change is what I'm saying, but they have to want to, and they have to change on purpose. They have to want to change on purpose. Are there limitations? Absolutely. Some of them are genetically based. That would be the orange cone. Some of them, things in life have happened. Time has gone on. Maybe there have been accidents that have caused certain deficits, that sort of thing. That might be more of this blue cone. But there are always choices that we have to change the trajectory, of our development. All right. Thanks for putting up with my graphics. I hope that was clear as mud, right? Here's the big point of all this, even if you didn't understand every detail of that. It's that every single choice you make, every single one, do you brush your teeth tonight or not? Right? Do you how are you going to answer the phone when your kids call tonight or tomorrow morning? Every single choice you make moves you in a developmental direction. It has an effect, a formative effect on who you are and who you are becoming. Own it. Own it. And so, I've worked with like sex addicts who say things like, yeah, but this was done to me when I was a kid, or yeah, but my wife, you still own your behaviors. And same thing with betrayed partners in this way. They'll say, I'm so angry. And there's a reality. Betrayal trauma is real. There are trauma reactions that cause people to violate their own values. But how do we help them? I got this from Janice Caudill. If y'all don't know Janice Caudill, she's a rock star therapist, CSAT, APSATS certified. I think she's on the APSATS board. Janice is amazing. She's the one who articulated it so well in a meeting I was with her recently, where she said, of course we want to help partners have containment boundaries for themselves based on their own values, because that is part of their own healing that they deserve. That is part of their own healing that they deserve. So we have to own that when I make choices, when I act out a behavior, it sets me further in one direction or another. Now, I'm not going to beat myself up with that. I'm not going to beat my partner up with that. I'm going to look at all the reality of that. And I'm going to say, only I can make a difference to change that in the end. Are there things my partner can do to help me? Yes. And should he or she do that? Yeah, sure. I mean, if it's a partnership, that's what we want. We want to help each other to thrive and be the best we can be, of course. But let's also recognize at the end of the day, I make choices. It's very empowering.
You've been listening to Betrayal Recovery Radio, the official podcast of APSATS. If you've received help or hope from this episode, I encourage you to share it with someone you know. If you've not yet done so, please subscribe to our podcast on your favorite listening platform. Thank you for joining us. I'm Dr. Jake Porter, and you can always email me directly at jake@apsats.org. I'd love to hear your ideas, questions, or comments about the show. Until next time, keep choosing to use your voice and live your values. It's good for you and for this world.